Hello everyone, welcome my YouTube channel. US to send $275 million more in aid to Ukraine. The US is sending another round of aid to Ukraine that includes additional ammunition for high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS, as part of a package worth $275 million, the State Department confirmed Friday. The latest aid means the US has provided approximately $17.9 billion in support to Ukraine since Russia invaded in February, a State Department spokesperson said. The latest package is also expected to include 500 precision-guided 155mm rounds, 2,155mm rounds of remote anti-armor mine (RAM) systems, 125 high-mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles (HMMWVs), more than 1,300 anti-armor systems, small arms and more than 2.7 million rounds of small arms ammunition, and 4 satellite communications antennas. The United States will continue to stand with more than 50 allies and partners in support of the people of Ukraine as they defend their freedom and independence with extraordinary courage and boundless determination, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement. Earlier this month, the U.S. committed another 4 HIMARS to Ukraine as part of a $625 million arms package. That package also included artillery systems, ammunition and armored vehicles. The U.S. has so far pulled 20 HIMARS from its own stocks for Ukraine. The advanced rocket systems and munitions allow Ukraine to target Russian command posts, ammunition hubs and support areas beyond the front lines. The expected announcement comes as Ukraine and its allies, including the U.S., warned Russia against using a dirty bomb, a device that uses conventional explosives to spread radioactive material, in Ukraine. Russia's defense minister had claimed in a series of calls with defense officials from other countries that it was Ukraine that was preparing to detonate such a device in its own territory, an accusation that the U.S. and several allies called transparently false. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday also claimed, after months of rising tensions, that he had no intention of using nuclear weapons in Ukraine, according to the Associated Press. "We see no need for that," Putin said, according to AP. "There is no point in that, neither political nor military." Russia recently unleashed a wave of attacks using Iranian-made self-detonating drones around Kyiv and other regions. The Biden administration has promised 18 more HIMARS through a contracting process that will take a few years to deliver to Ukraine, a senior defense official said last month. Putin is inventing a whole new kind of nuclear blackmail. It's been quite a week for the Armageddon watch. Over the weekend, Russia's defense minister made a round of threatening phone calls to leaders in the US and other Western nations alleging that Ukraine was preparing a radioactive, dirty bomb for use on the battlefield. The Allies quickly and publicly dismissed the fact-free claim as a Russian false flag operation that might presage Russia itself preparing such an attack. By Wednesday, Vladimir Putin himself was promoting the story of the dirty bomb, which he called a provocation by Ukraine. He mentioned it again in a ranty speech on Thursday, along with the caveat that there was no need for Russia to hit Ukraine with nukes and the ominous warning that this is the most dangerous, unpredictable, and, at the same time, important decade since the end of the Second World War. Whatever one makes of Putin's words, Russia's recent reverses on the battlefield have increased fears that he will respond with nuclear escalation. One of his most brutal fighters, the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, this week called for Russia to wipe Ukrainian cities off the face of the earth. Anxiety was running high about all of this in Washington, where President Biden spent hours huddled with advisors puzzling through the latest threats and warned that if Putin were to go nuclear it would be a serious mistake. One horrible consequence of the war is this debate itself, the first superpower nuclear standoff of the 21st century, and almost certainly not the last. In private conversations these days with senior officials, there invariably comes a moment when someone asks just what are the chances that Putin will actually use a nuclear weapon. The answer is never zero, as it would have been before Russia invaded Ukraine. What a terrible way to observe the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world came to the precipice of nuclear conflict and the United States and the Soviet Union, just barely, found a way back from the brink. On Thursday, I moderated a panel at the annual Carnegie International Nuclear Policy Conference, in Washington, that reinforced how quickly Putin has returned us to contemplation of the previously unthinkable. The session began with a virtual reality simulation that puts viewers in the role of the American president in a nuclear scenario, given minutes to respond to an incoming Russian nuclear strike of 300 intercontinental ballistic missiles. As alarms sound in the Oval Office, the president is pulled into a secure bunker, warned that the Secret Service will soon evacuate, and given 3 unpalatable options for a counterstrike: minimal information, and no real counsel on what to do. Sharon K. Wiener, one of the simulation's creators, said that, in a controlled study, 90% of those who took the virtual reality simulation chose to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike. Before the dreadful events of 2022, such a scenario would have been a purely academic exercise, so implausible as to be safely removed from the real world. As recently as 2010, after all, President Barack Obama summoned 47 world leaders to Washington for a conference on how to move the world toward getting rid of nuclear weapons entirely. Dmitry Medvedev, Putin's placeholder as Russia's president at the time, attended. "We are now closer to cooperation than catastrophe," the former Senator Sam Nunn, an advisor to Obama on nuclear issues, said optimistically as that summit ended. Would that he had been right. But here we are, little more than a decade later, with Russia's leader openly using nuclear blackmail as part of his faltering war of conquest against a neighboring country. Chris Ford, who served as the Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation in the Trump administration, told the panel that Putin had invented a whole new kind of nuclear playbook in Ukraine, in which he has deployed nuclear saber rattling, not to deter others from attacking Russia but to gain a tactical advantage. Putin's threats allow him to fight Ukraine while warning the West that it would risk a nuclear response from Russia if it intervened militarily in the conflict. That is a playbook now that is being developed not for defensive purposes but to use strategic arsenals to create opportunities for aggression against one's smaller neighbors, Ford said. Without an obvious playbook for how to respond, this arguably makes the current crisis even more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis, whose shadow hung over the discussion. When Putin first started invoking the specter of nuclear conflagration after invading Ukraine, Michael Dobbs, a historian whose book, 1 Minute to Midnight, is a definitive account of the 1962 standoff, pointed out that crisis had only lasted 13 days, compared with the months or years that this one could persist. And of course, the longer the war in Ukraine goes on, the riskier it becomes. On Thursday, when I asked Dobbs to compare the two, his reply was unnerving. "I don't see the same opportunities for diffusing the current crisis with a Cuba-like compromise," he said, referring to the full withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba in return for a non-invasion pledge from the US and secret promise to dismantle American intermediate-range missiles in Turkey. Dobbs added, "Mathematically, therefore, length of the crisis multiplied by the number of things that can go wrong and lack of obvious exit ramps, the degree of risk is comparable, perhaps higher now. Good day to everyone."